The United Nations 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights states everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media, regardless of frontiers. Canada believes freedom of expression is at the core of human individuality and is one of the essential foundations of a safe and prosperous society. The right of everyone to hold opinions without interference and the right to freedom of expression are in Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and reaffirmed in Article 19 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. This includes freedom to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas of all kinds, whether orally, in writing, or in print, or through any other media source. Canada's Section 2B of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedom states that everyone has the freedom of thought, belief, opinion, and expression, including freedom of press and other media communication. Now, this is important to state because we know that some people out there try to silence and rid you of your rights to speak out, and that is a violation of the UN and Canadian laws. Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of Metis Warrior, here with Timothy and Alexandria.
Hello everybody.
And so today we're going to be talking about a self-server, an individual that's all about himself and not about the Indigenous people. In fact, he despises the Indigenous people so much that he's decided to support the police in Winnipeg. Today we're going to talk about an individual who has definitely slapped the Indigenous people in the face with a full-page ad that he took out, costing, we don't even know the dollar amount at this point, if it was $30,000, thousands of dollars at least we know, for the full-page ad to support the police chief. And his name, this self-server, is David Chartrand.
And before we go into the topic of today's show, and that's where the MMF took out a full-page ad in support of Police Chief Danny Smyth and the Winnipeg Police Department, March 13th, 2021, a morale boost. Let's do a little bit of history, folks. All Canadian policing started with Red River Expeditionary Force. More than 1,000 Canadian troops arrived in Manitoba to begin their reign of terror against the Métis. And the Red River Expedition was the military force that was sent to Manitoba after the transfer of the Hudson Bay Company territory to Canada in 1870. And the government tried to give the impression it was not a punitive expedition against Louis Riel's provisional government, but the military men wanted to avenge the execution of Thomas Scott. And the expedition left Toronto May 1870 and reached Fort Garry on August 24th. They found the fort deserted, for Louis Riel had fled at their approach. And the British quickly returned to Ontario, leaving the militia to garrison the community. So they left the militia to garrison the community, and militia harassment of Métis exasperated already intense feelings and assaults, and at least one death resulted. So here we have David Chartrand, the president of the Manitoba Métis Federation, supporting a colonial institution that has oppressed Métis and Indigenous people since the very beginning, folks. I find that disgusting, racist, and let's put this into perspective. Policing does not make us safer. The new status game, and David Chartrand and the Manitoba Métis Federation are part of this status game of blind loyalty and allyship. And this does more harm in the present than its supposed goal of correcting the past. And Chartrand has clearly chosen the police opposed to his people, and that's really disgusting.
And let's talk about this, okay? That ad was a look the other way ad. We know, and we've been telling people out there for 2 years, the corruption of David Chartrand with misappropriating Métis funds. We don't know why David Chartrand felt the need to pay for this kiss-ass ad to the police chief, but we can speculate that this was nothing more than a look the other way ad. But we do know this, and this is what I want you to pay attention to. He takes the Métis rights. He gets money from Canada, and he couldn't do that without the members, right? Without the Métis. He can't do that without the Métis. And what happens? Himself and others get real rich off of this, and it does not get distributed fairly. And let's talk about a fair election. When the hell has that ever occurred? And so let's look at what's happened in 2020. The Winnipeg Police, now keep in mind, this is who David Chartrand, the MMF president, supported, took 3 Indigenous lives. One of them was a 16-year-old girl. Okay, and this is in 2020. Let's talk about Aisha Hudson, Jason Collins, and Stuart Andrews. And so if you think about it like this, the fact that they have no problem with their racist behavior, their anti-Indigenous attitudes, that they quick to kill children, Indigenous children. I mean, we're talking about one was a 16-year-old girl.
Can I talk about Aisha for a minute before you go on?
Yes.
So Aisha Hudson was a 16-year-old Indigenous girl who was murdered by a Winnipeg police officer on April 8, 2020. And the shocking thing is the officer was let off with no charges or penalties, and the officer was not required to be interviewed for the investigation, despite his statement after the killing and contradicting video evidence. And the use of force report, which has not been released to the public, was also written by someone with an extensive background in law enforcement. And it's just shocking where the family is demanding change within the Winnipeg Police Service on how they handle or the oversight of investigations. It just makes my stomach turn, and our hearts goes out to the family of Aisha Hudson, that was a 16-year-old Indigenous girl who was murdered by a Winnipeg police officer. That's who David Chartrand is supporting, folks. If you've got children, grandchildren, that should make your blood boil.
Jason Collins, 36. Killed again. Here's another one, killed by the Winnipeg police. Okay, let's understand that. So he was killed by Winnipeg police. Okay, so this was an Indigenous father killed by the Winnipeg police. But David Chartrand applauds the action of the Winnipeg Police Department. And when we say corruption, we're talking about severe misappropriation of funds. And we have so much financial documents that proves that they do not do the right things with the Métis money. They have been misappropriating funds.
And folks, an investigation in the past found Winnipeg police claimed 19 lives between 2000 and 2017, suggesting incidents of deadly force have increased dramatically in recent years. Of the 19 people killed, 11 were Indigenous, more than half of the victims. Folks, that is who David Chartrand is supporting when you have 11 Indigenous people that were murdered. Their lives were taken by the Winnipeg Police Department. And according to Statistics Canada, just over 10% of Winnipeg's population is Indigenous, folks.
Stuart Kevin Andrews was shot by the Winnipeg Police. A 16-year-old boy was also injured during the incident, police said. Both were taken to the hospital, and that is where Andrews died. So that is another man that was killed by the Winnipeg Police. The police that David Chartrand has no problem supporting. And we've been telling you for how long that this man is not for the Indigenous people, that this man is for himself and himself alone, not for the Indigenous people.
And folks, I'm going to read something to you, and it made me sick to my stomach, and I really had to reread it several times. It was posted the last couple of days on social media, and this happened recently in Winnipeg. And if this doesn't shock you, I don't know what will. This afternoon, a colleague and myself were driving over the Redwood Bridge in Winnipeg. I know where the Redwood Bridge is, where traffic was backed up in the middle and cars were slowly proceeding. From afar, I could see a young Indigenous woman climbing the bridge. As we approached, I seen her slip a noose over her neck. Without a second thought, we parked the van right on the bridge and jumped into action. We began talking to her calmly, offering supports and talk her down as best as we could. The Winnipeg Police driving by attended the scene and immediately began swearing at her and berating her with inappropriate language while being super aggressive, while this woman clearly was in severe mental duress. The police triggered her. They antagonized her, calling her names, and she jumped. With the noose around her neck, nobody else stopped to help. Cars backed up on the bridge, honking at us while the girl was hanging. She dangled there, and her face started to change color before she was cut down. Is this how anybody going through a mental emergency should be treated? I'm so disgusted with the Winnipeg Police and extremely hurt and messed up right now with the amount of missing and murdered Indigenous women in this city and across the country. It's no wonder, as an Indigenous woman, I will never call these police for help. And that was the Winnipeg Police Department, where they were aggressive, swearing at her, berating her, and using appropriate language against an Indigenous woman that was trying to commit suicide. She was in obvious mental distress, and it really makes my stomach turn that this is how the Winnipeg Police conduct themselves, and this is who David Chartrand is supporting. And you know what, David Chartrand, you had no right to write that letter or put that ad out, the big full color ad in the Winnipeg Sun on behalf of the Métis citizens. We did not want that. We don't acknowledge that. That is disgusting. You do not have a right.
What does Christy Belcourt say about it?
Well, you know what? There's been a buzz all over social media with people that are angry. People are upset of what is going on.
Her exact feelings about it's represented in her response on social media, because Chartrand has sent this ad out claiming that the Métis just love the police. The Indigenous just love the police in Winnipeg. No, man.
Well, this is
that's not true at all.
This is one comment that Christy Belcourt said on social media. The MMF and David Chartrand have no right to speak on behalf of the Métis Nation. They are an embarrassment to our ancestors and the next generations. I stand with all the families of the victims of the Winnipeg Police. Okay, here is the other quotation that Christy Belcourt said. He has no authority to speak on behalf of the whole Métis Nation, the fucking gall.
Yeah, that's and you know what? That is absolutely right. He has no authority to do that. You know, and again, that was a look the other way ad clearly. And if people don't realize that this man's a self-server and all about himself, and I want to clear up some things. Let's keep in mind, this police chief is not a new police chief. He's been involved with leading the Winnipeg Police since 2016. So understand that in 2020, when they were murdering Indigenous people, that yes, Smyth was there. he was there. He was leading the Winnipeg Police. So understand that. So we know the racism that's out there. The police are severe racist against the Indigenous people. I mean, oftentimes when they murder an Indigenous person, nothing really happens. They get a slap on the hand, and that's it. Nothing really happens.
And a lot of people all over social media in response to the MMF, here are some more comments where people said they reported the MMF's tweet as disrespectful and offensive, abusive, and harmful. And one other comment is, you need to be nice to the pigs, otherwise they'll have nobody to call to force the homeless away from the Métis headquarters. And it's just absolutely disgusting that the Manitoba Métis Federation has aligned themselves with a colonial institution. And here's something else that you may find interesting as well. There was an article put out May 7th, 2020 in Winnipeg. This pertains to Winnipeg. In the span of 1 year, more than 30 children, youth, and young adults under the age of 21 died by suicide in Manitoba, according to the province's child advocate Daphne Penrose. And Penrose writes that between April 1st, 2018 and March 31st, 2019, 32 children, youth, and young adults under the age of 21 died of suicide. And why I'm mentioning that is why Chartrand took out the full page ad, the morale boost, is that reports were emerging about the Winnipeg Police Department and their morale issues amongst police officers in the light of recent suicide of a police officer. So again, Chief Danny Smyth thanks David Chartrand for defending and protecting the integrity and the character of the police service as you continue to hold the people's trust. But folks, what about the Indigenous youth who committed suicide? What about murdered and missing Indigenous women? What about the Indigenous deaths by police? Instead of spending thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars on this morale boost full page ad, what about supporting the Métis people? That amount of money, how many people could have been fed? How many students could have been put to school? In a time of COVID, you're throwing money to kiss the ass of the Winnipeg Police Department? Wake up, Métis people.
Well, Daryl LaRoe says that the ad cost $30,000. Look at your screen. This is where Daryl LaRoe, and we all know he's close to Chartrand, at least until Chartrand pulled this crap. And so maybe that is what the amount was for the ad. But let's look at it. If it was $30,000, as Daryl LaRoe said, $30,000 for the ad to support the police. Man, that is you could have gave 30 Métis families $1,000, or you could have gave 60 Métis families $500. Instead, you paid for an ad. This essentially worked. So Chief Danny Smyth has actually went on there and he's kissing back to Chartrand. So this their little romance they have going on seems to really be working here with each other. And who knows what the real story is between those two as far as what's going on behind the scenes, because we know nobody gives a shit when it comes to investigating the wrong that's been done to the Indigenous people. The missing and murdered Indigenous women out there, the RCMP, they're not helpful at all, are they? I mean, I'm sure everybody can agree that the RCMP is corrupt as hell. They're corrupt.
And you know what? You'll also see, Timothy just mentioned Daryl LaRoe, and you know what? There's something more going on when Daryl LaRoe decides to cancel his participation in the MMF conference this coming week for taking out running a full-page newspaper ad undermining the work of thousands of grassroots anti-racist activists in Winnipeg. So there's something going on when you have somebody that's been the go-to for the MMF and the MNC to cancel his participation in this conference.
Now, it's no secret we don't support Daryl LaRoe. However, we back his move here 100% because he did the right thing. By pulling out of that meeting after that ad was done, Daryl LaRoe gained a little bit of respect from us by doing that, because that shows that he agrees with what Chartrand done, and his wording is with MMF leadership done, which raises another question, because we're talking about David Chartrand here. But how many other people were involved in this ad? I'd have to assume it's more than one person. Number one, did they get permission? Who gave permission for $30,000 to go to this ad, if it was $30,000 as LaRoe claims? And number two, I'm sure it was more than Chartrand that made the decision to do this. So who is the other ones responsible for this ad? That is the question, folks. Well, in order to find that out, you need to look at those who are closest to him.
Again, what really makes me upset, and this is the Manitoba Métis Federation, what they're saying on Twitter. You'll see screenshots throughout the show where, again, they're thanking Chief Danny Smyth for defending and protecting the integrity and the character of the police service as you continue to hold the people's trust. How in the hell are you holding people's trust when the police are continually murdering Indigenous women and men, boys,
and turning their head to sexual assaults? Chartrand and Chartier, you paying attention to what we're saying here? Pay very close attention. The police are clearly turning their heads to women that are making sexual assault claims. Not just women, but underage girls. So let's understand, why is old men out there raping underage girls? And then what is the police doing about this? What is really going on? Why are they turning their head to the women? Why are they not supporting the Indigenous women out there when people in certain positions are out there clearly committing sexual misconduct? That is a question. And Chartrand and Chartier, can y'all answer that?
Well, you know what? This kind of will shed some light on it here. And this was on Twitter, where the Winnipeg Police Chief Danny Smyth responds, and it says, the Winnipeg Police are humbled by the support of President Chartrand, the MMF cabinet, and the Manitoba Métis Federation. So he's saying that Chartrand, the MMF cabinet, and everybody in the MMF are part of this statement. It is an honor to serve the Métis people. How in the hell are you serving the Métis people? I just don't know how the police chief could say they're serving the Métis people.
You ain't serving nothing but yourself, man. You're serving the Métis leaders out there, because clearly, if there was no corruption in law enforcement, in Winnipeg, with the Winnipeg Police or with the RCMP, David Chartrand and other people would not still be in the position that they're in. So let's acknowledge that straight out the gate, straight from the get-go there. We have to acknowledge that. So he's serving the Métis leaders. He's not serving the Métis people. Maybe you got it confused, police chief. Let's understand this. We disagree 100% with what Chartrand said in that ad. We disagree with it. Well, we do not agree with that ad at all, and he did not speak with us. So you are not supporting the Métis people, police chief.
David Chartrand did not consult the members of the Manitoba Métis Federation or the Métis Nation. They did not. He had no right to make that statement on behalf of Métis citizens. He doesn't represent me in that statement, my family, or anybody else. He had no right to go and pay thousands and thousands of dollars for this ad, again, to kiss the ass of the Winnipeg Police Department, because that's exactly what it is, folks. While Métis Indigenous people are murdered, missing, abused, beaten up. You know what I can tell you? I'm going to tell you two personal stories, and I can say this with certainty.
Before you get into that, let me say this to the murdered family, the family members of the murdered Indigenous out there. Okay? So this is the point that I want to get across to you. You know that David Chartrand completely disregards the life of your loved one who has been killed. He did that with this ad. That is 100% disrespect to you. This police chief Danny Smyth was the police chief when a lot of these murders occurred. So understand it happened under his watch. He was the leader, let's say, of the Winnipeg Police when these murders occurred. So it happened under his watch. And that's a point that I want to make clear. Now, Alexandria's got one hell of a story, and I want y'all to pay attention because the police have continually harassed people, and every time they kill somebody, what do? They say, "Oh, I'm sorry," and that's it. It's as if their lives matter, but the Indigenous lives don't. We're fed up with it. Tell your story.
You know what, folks? All Indigenous lives matter. And again, David Chartrand is really slapping the face of the family members of the victims of the Winnipeg Police Department, disrespecting them. Their lives all mattered. And again, it's shocking, and I can say this with certainty. The first incident in Winnipeg, a friend of mine was actually in a relationship with a Winnipeg police officer, and I happened to witness this conversation. I was sitting there, and this Winnipeg police officer said, when we're all sitting at the table, he said, "You know what we do when we're bored and we're doing our calls or our routes or whatever?" He goes, "We go beat up a couple drunk Indigenous people by the Salvation Army, and then we got a call, we got work that we can take them to the drunk tank." And everybody just laughed their ass off, and I just kind of looked, and I just left the room because I just couldn't believe that a Winnipeg police officer could say when they're bored and they have no calls, they head off to the Salvation Army and they pick on a drunk Indigenous person, beat the crap out of them, and then have to take them to the drunk tank just so they can their night or their night watch isn't as boring. That's absolutely disgusting. That is the kind of behavior that David Chartrand and the MMF are supporting. Make
this police chief, make no mistake about it. This police chief supporting it too. And so we don't support the Winnipeg Police. Hell no. We don't support the RCMP. Hell no. And so let's understand that. There's been too many issues, too many problems. And let me ask you something, Police Chief Danny Smyth. Let me ask you this. When is the last time, since you've been puckering up to Chartrand out there, and on Chartrand out there, let me ask you this, Chief. This is the question. When is the last time there's been a fair election at the MMF? Can you say that? What is the money? Here's another question. Question 2. Is the money, the tax dollars, being dispersed the way it should, or has it been misappropriated severely by the MMF? Oh, and here's a question for you, Chief, Police Chief. Here's a question for you. What about all the sexually assaulted women out there? What has happened to the people that have sexually assaulted them? What about that, Police Chief? The sexually assaulted Indigenous women that seem to just get protected, and everything's just swept under the rug.
So, folks, make no mistake about it. David Chartrand and the MMF, Indigenous lives do not matter. And the second personal story I can tell you, around 2000, it happened to myself and my family. I was a member of the Manitoba Métis Federation, and to cut the story short, because you can reference it, it's all online, my case made legal history. There was a false tip given to the police, and at 6 o'clock in the morning a SWAT team arrived at my home. My son was 9 years old at the time, and they told my son for him to come out of the house with his hands up or they would shoot him dead. 9-year-old, half asleep, wondering why a SWAT team, everybody with assault rifles in black, are coming into our home. And what happened is, again, it was a false tip. They thought there was a weapon in the thing, and actually my son had a German Shepherd dog that he rescued from the Winnipeg Humane Society. In front of my son, the police officer said to my son, "If you cannot control this dog, we're going to shoot your dog." Again, saying that to a 9-year-old child. And what they did is, my son and I were not under arrest. They positioned us in a Winnipeg police cruiser car right in front of our neighbor's house on the street for 3 hours. They detained us. We were not under
Which
arrest.
was a wrongful detainment, by the way.
We were. They didn't read us our rights. My son asked.
Well, no, you weren't even under arrest. Why were they detaining you?
That's right. But my son asked to go to the bathroom. The officer said no. They proceeded to turn up their radio in their police cruiser, play loud rock music, and laugh their ass off. So my son and I spent 3 hours in a cruiser car, humiliated in front of our neighbors before, and again the police officer came in front of my son. We may have to shoot your dog. So when all was said and done, and again the police tried to cover everything up and blah blah blah, it was a mistake, blah blah blah. What I did, folks, because I reached out to the Manitoba Métis Federation for help, legal help, to fight against the brutality. The Winnipeg Police Department violated my Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms. You know what I was told by the Manitoba Métis Federation? We can't help you. There's nothing you can do. Just go to legal aid. So my own governing body turned their back on me, a mother trying to defend her 9-year-old child. So what I did, folks, is that I acted as my own attorney while working full-time, looking after my 9-year-old son, and I won my case, my Lyra case. I was the first person to actually win that by acting as my own attorney, because I figured, you know what, there was no way in hell I was going to let 2 Winnipeg police officers intimidate my son and myself and violate our Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms. So every single day I attended court, and when I walked into the courtroom, there was a wall of blue. It was police officers that were supporting the 2 officers that were on trial for the Lyra case, staring me down, trying to degrade me and intimidate me. But you know what? I held my head high. I walked in that courtroom. They had, the Winnipeg Police Department had a high-power attorney. I was up against him every day. I had to hit law books from the library. I had to examine ballistics, because what they did is in our upstairs, one of the SWAT team tripped, and one of his... what
a clown, tripping.
He tripped, and his assault rifle went into our bathroom wall. And he blamed it on because the carpet, he slipped on the carpet. So I had to study ballistics, angles on weapons, all that stuff, and I did that because the Manitoba Métis Federation turned their back on an Indigenous Métis woman trying to defend the rights of her and her 9-year-old child, a violation of Charter, human rights, and freedoms. And you know what? It took a lot out of me, but I did it myself, and I won my case. And the sheer brutality, the disrespect, the racism that the Winnipeg Police Department have against the Indigenous people is shocking, and it'll make your stomach turn. And why David Chartrand would have the audacity to spend thousands and thousands of dollars on a full-page ass kissing the ass of the Winnipeg Police Department. You
puckered right up and
you gotta wonder,
kissed his ass.
Well, you know what?
Kissed the police chief's ass. But guess what? The police chief, what did he do? He puckered the hell up to it.
David Chartrand is a veteran ass kisser, because he's right up Justin Trudeau's ass like you brown noser, like you wouldn't believe it. And it's disgusting. And you'll see throughout the show the screenshot of this full page ad from the MMF and David Chartrand. And again, it's how it starts off is commending Chief Danny Smyth and the Winnipeg Police Service, and then in bold it has honor, respect, and trust. What about the honor and respect of the Indigenous people that were murdered by the Winnipeg Police Department? What about the honor and respect of the family members that are fighting for justice for the murdered Indigenous people at the hands of the Winnipeg Police Department? And again, near the end of it, you'll see working together every day can be a better day. We are proud of you. What the frick is going through your mind? You're proud of the Winnipeg Police murdering and brutalizing Indigenous and Métis people? You're sicker than I really thought, David Chartrand.
So, now here's the thing that we got to get across. Does the police chief support an organization that doesn't run fair elections? Does the police chief support an organization that misappropriates tax dollars? Does a police chief support the mistreatment of the Indigenous people? This is what I want to tell the police chief out there. If you want the respect of the Indigenous people, you're not going to get it by having a personal relationship with David Chartrand and y'all writing love letters to each other or whatever the hell you want to call it. That's not how you're going to get the respect of the Indigenous people. I guarantee you that. There needs to be a lot of damn change. And it was under your watch a lot of the wrong happened.
And you know what, folks? This show is dedicated to all the Indigenous lives that were cut short, that were murdered by the Winnipeg Police. And it's really, and again, I bring back to alone October 12th, 2020 were 3 Indigenous lives murdered by Winnipeg Police within 10 days in April. And remember these names: Aisha Hudson, Jason Collins, and Stuart Kevin Andrews. These are just a few of the Indigenous lives that were cut short at the hands of the brutality of the Winnipeg Police Department. Indigenous lives matter. Say their names. Remember their names.
Not to mention all the ones that's been beat up, like you said, all the ones that's been abused, all the police brutality out there, all the disrespect that's shown out there towards the Indigenous people in Winnipeg. I mean, that ad was nothing but full of shit, man.
Well, you know, it's really disgusting in, again, the time of COVID that you would spend thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars of an ass kisser ad to the Winnipeg Police Department.
It was a look the other way ad.
Well,
clearly. And you know what? The chief bought it. He fell for it.
Well, I mean, you always hear that people, buy judges off, they buy police chiefs
bribe
off.
People, bribe this person, bribe that person. Well, he's got the police chief right here.
What's really going on?
Buddy now. What's really going on?
Something is really going on behind the scenes that you have David Chartrand and the MMF. Clearly, again, Indigenous lives, Métis lives do not matter to them. That money could have been spent to put how many students through school, homeless, Métis and Indigenous, feed families, hampers, what have you. Instead, you're going to kiss the ass of a Winnipeg Police Department, a racist, colonial organization, and you are again committing atrocities against your own people by siding with the colonials.
Yeah, and again, I mean, if the RCMP was not corrupt and if the Winnipeg Police was not corrupt, let me tell you something. A lot of these women that have been raped when they were underage, their rapist would be arrested by now. And let me tell you this. If the RCMP was not corrupt and the Winnipeg Police was not corrupt, David Chartrand and Chartier would not be in the positions that they are in right now, because when you go back and look at that damn audit that happened on the MNC, and nobody was held accountable for that. Nobody. Where the hell did all them tax dollars go? Where did they go?
And David Chartrand, MMF cabinet ministers, I would suggest you educate yourself on Métis history, learn history when again all Canadian policing started with the Red River Expeditionary Force, when over 1,000 Canadian troops arrived in Manitoba to begin their reign of terror against the Métis. And how dare you proudly toot Louis Riel as the hero when you're siding with the colonialists that had him tried and hung for treason. Wipe your mouth and don't even speak the name of Louis Riel, David Chartrand and the MMF. Learn your Métis history and exactly what happened in the Red River Expedition. Learn it.
I want you to know we had another show we were going to do. It's a very important show. Everybody's asking where's the Metis Warriors on this issue that has been going on out there. Two separate issues, actually. So we have going to cause a lot of people to be screwed over. But we felt it important to address this issue first. In our next show, we will be dealing with that. However, we wanted to make it clear to the police chief and the Winnipeg Police, you do not have the support of the Indigenous people. You do not have the support of the Métis at all. And if you think by going to an organization that might have X amount of people registered there because they think they're going to get something out of it, you're wrong. Yeah, that is not where your support's going to come from. We know they turn their heads to a lot of crap, especially when it comes to the MMF and Chartrand. But I mean, will they cover it? Who knows?
And again, before we wrap it up, certainly by this full page ad in the Winnipeg Sun, March 13th, 2021, to David Chartrand, the MMF cabinet, Indigenous Métis lives do not matter. Again, you're siding with the colonialists, which are racist and derogatory against Indigenous and Métis people. And David Chartrand, MMF cabinet, you had no right to make that statement on behalf of myself, my family, and everybody else. Who in the hell do you think you are?
Here's a question I'd like to propose to everyone out there, and it's just a question. Is Police Chief Danny Smyth some kind of way benefiting financially from David Chartrand, the MMF, or some kind of business deals through the MMF or David Chartrand? This is a question I'd like to ask the RCMP, and this is a question I'd like to ask the people out there. Has Police Chief Danny Smyth financially benefited, or one of his family members financially benefited from Chartrand or one of the business deals through the MMF or something like that? That is a serious question, because that will be a conflict of interest when you have an individual who's did a look the other way ad, when you have people out there who's complaining about the misappropriation of tax funds, which, by the way, is criminal. That is criminal. The misappropriation and the money that has went missing. That tax dollars is for you, the Métis people. That tax dollars is not to go to kiss the ass of a police chief. That is not what those tax dollars are for. And Chartrand, he spit on the graves of every murdered Indigenous person when he did that ad. And to the family members out there, I want to make it clear that what happened was, when your family members have been killed by the police, and here you have the president of the MMF thanking them. It hasn't even been a year yet since 3 people were murdered in 2020. And here you have the president of the MMF doing a thank you ad. What he's essentially done was spit on the grave of every murdered Indigenous person that's been murdered by the Winnipeg Police Department.
Métis people, I really want you to ponder this. The timing of this ad is a little ironic and perhaps political. There has to be a story behind this that we do not see or know about at the moment. And it is very, very concerning for the MMF to put these statements out there on behalf of the Métis Nation when there are tons of its members who have been hurt, and there's tons of people that have been Indigenous people that have been murdered by the police department in Winnipeg. Duty to consult, MMF. How many Métis Nation citizens were consulted on this ad and this statement before you put it out? Did you consult the family of 16-year-old Aisha Hudson and others? Her mother is Métis. Was she consulted? And the MMF says it proudly serves Métis citizens since 1967. And it also says, the MMF states, it's the official democratic, that's the key word, democratic and self-governing political rep for all Métis people of Manitoba. And the recent full-page ad by the MMF that spent thousands and thousands of dollars certainly was not a democratic ad. And the MMF really is an embarrassment to the Métis people it is supposed to represent. And I'm very disgusted and disturbed by this ad.
And just let me tell you, the MMF is not representing the people. They're representing only the leadership, because those are the people that are misappropriating funds. Those are the people that are calling the police on its own citizens. And those are the people, just the leadership, that is getting rich off your rights, Métis citizens. This is what I need you to understand. They're using your rights, approaching the government with it, and they are getting filthy rich off of this, and that is wrong. And we know that if the RCMP was not corrupt, and the Winnipeg Police was not corrupt, then everybody who's made accusations on sexual assault, that those people, that the ones who have violated these women, would have been prosecuted. Why has things been swept under the rug? And again, Chartier and Chartrand, are you paying attention to what we're saying here? And so I really want you to pay attention to that. And so this is the thing. There's no representation for the Métis people. This is corrupt. Within the MMF is very corrupt. There needs to be new leadership there. There's no fair elections. Bottom line, Chartrand needs to resign now. There needs to be some integrity, some transparency, and some true serving of the Métis people within the MMF. And we just don't have that now.
There is no, again, duty to consult, and certainly this statement, this full-page ad, wasn't a democratic representation of the Métis citizens of the Métis Nation, folks. I wasn't consulted, my family wasn't consulted, and dozens of other people all over social media saying they weren't consulted.
That's it for me.
Take care, folks.